Andres and Saad, alumni from the fellowship program from other countries, and we'll get to hear from them in just a few minutes. First, as a bit of a background, the Carter Center was founded in 1982 by former U.S. President Jimmy Carter and former First Lady Rosalind Carter. The center is a non-governmental organization and has helped to improve life for people in more than 80 countries by resolving conflicts, preventing diseases, improving mental health care, and advancing democracy, human rights, and economic opportunity. In the mental health program specifically, we work to promote awareness about mental health issues, inform public policy, achieve equity for mental health care comparable to other health care, and reduce stigma and discrimination against those with mental health and substance use conditions, both in the United States and internationally. This year marks the 50th year of Mrs. Carter's work in mental health. The work that she has been doing really began early on in President Carter's political career when he ran for governor of the state of Georgia. Thanks to her unrelenting motivation, innumerable people with mental illnesses today have access to mental health care, insurance payments for it, and the freedom to live a life of dignity and self-respect. I would like to thank Her Highness Sheikh Moza, who helped make this partnership and our work in Doha possible with Mrs. Carter. I would also like to thank Her Excellency Sheikh Hind and Wish for being a partner of our program, as well as all the journalists and students who have participated in our program over the years. With partners like Wish, we've been able to support and train over 220 journalists in various countries to engage in widespread, effective, and sustained behavioral health reporting that affects positive change in policy, behavioral health systems, and stigma. How news and media report on mental health topics sets the tone for how our communities view, talk about, and treat or seek treatment for mental health disorders. Using the right language to share personal stories of lived experience or discuss symptoms, ways to seek help, and positive examples of life and recovery help dismantle stigma. The integration of mental health into our daily lives through balanced, accurate reporting has helped enhance public understanding and normalize mental health and substance use issues. We are not done yet, and we have a lot of work to do. But as long as we continue these discussions and opening minds, we are moving in the right direction. To begin our panel today, we will watch a brief segment from our team member, Carrie Cobham, delivering a TEDx talk on mental health.
And the language that we use to talk about such a common challenge matters. When we talk about mental health, what do we say? What if we change the way that we talk about mental health? We say committed suicide, or that someone was committed to a psychiatric facility. But what else do we commit? Crimes, right? We say someone is suffering from depression. And yes, it is a hard and a fluid place to be, I know. But how would it shape our perception if we said living with instead? We say someone is bipolar or schizophrenic, but what does that do? It labels them. It defines them by their condition instead of as someone living with the condition. We say substance abuse, but is it really abuse if addiction is a disease of the brain that drives usage regardless of circumstances? The words that you hear and the words that you use shape your perception. They can lift or break someone in a moment. Like telling someone, maybe they just needed more friends.
Mental illnesses are among the most common health conditions in the United States and around the world. And through all the hardship and tragedy of this unprecedented time, COVID-19 is not the only pressing matter. Keynote speaker Eva Longoria reminded us of this yesterday, stating that we now have the opportunity to see some of the pre-existing struggles, specifically within communities with fewer resources and higher potential incidences of mental illness. The conversations around mental health, though, and mental illness have increased throughout this year, bringing a somewhat strange silver lining to 2020 and all that we're going through together. Yesterday, we also heard from Alistair Campbell, author and former spokesman for former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He said we all have mental health, and some days it's great, and some days it isn't great. And some of us may feel this is common sense, and yet we continue to see barriers to discuss mental health without creating stigma. It's our hope that through journalism and media, we will continue to reach communities around the world and increase the conversations around mental health. Now, to begin our discussion, I would like to ask our panelists to give a brief introduction and biography, if they wouldn't mind. Andres, let's start with you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andres Bermudez. I'm a Colombian journalist born and based in Colombia. I am an investigative reporter at the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism, and mostly I've covered the ground trying to understand the complexities of post-conflict Colombia, with a special attention to how victims of our armed conflict have been coping with mental and emotional health issues, and moreover, how they have devised their own strategies to basically rebuild their lives.
Thank you, Andres. Saad?
Hi, everyone. My name is Saad Ijaz. I am a journalism and strategic communication student at Northwestern University in Qatar. In the past, I've written for The Guardian, where I've covered voting rights in US elections. I've also received a grant from the Political Center for Crisis Reporting that has allowed me to film a documentary about the lives of Yemeni asylum seekers in South Korea. When I'm not writing, I also like to be behind the camera. I've made studio-funded narrative short films about eating disorders, poverty, gender inequality, which have been featured in film festivals across the globe.
Thank you both. So let's get started. Andres, how would you describe the mental health reporting in the countries where you live and work?
Well, I would say that it's been an issue that has been under the radar, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that Colombia, for example, has a very particular situation. It went through a 52-year-long armed conflict that ended with our 2016 peace accord, and that it's still struggling anyways in this, long and rocky and tumultuous transition. And with so many things happening, and obviously, other problems from economic to the pandemic today, all sorts of challenges, really. I think mental and emotional health issues have been really under the radar for most citizens, even though we have such an obvious toll linked to it on account of violence. But I think it's only very recently that we started realizing how important it is to incorporate this into our reporting. And I still think it's an ongoing process, and it's a work in progress, really. But I can see that little by little you start seeing more mental and emotional health issues becoming a part of journalists' take on things and the way we observe the reality around here and I think that applies both to Colombia as to the whole of Latin America, which follows many similar patterns to where I live.
Thank you. Saad, how about you? How would you describe the mental health reporting where you live and work?
Right. So my answer is sort of twofold, right? So I was born and raised in Pakistan, but I study and work in Qatar, and I've had experience reporting in both countries, right? So there are some similarities and there are some differences in how both the countries are doing when it comes to mental health reporting. So like Andres said, the same thing applies for, Pakistan as well. It's a country that has experienced, violence for years and years now, and time after time, study after study, report after report has shown us that, mental illness is something that is rampant. My conversations with doctors and psychiatrists on the ground have told me that it's rampant, but there is very little reporting. It's almost absent. And when reporting does happen, it's often centered around the government plan for something, or if a minister has a report, right? It's never about people who are living through any sort of mental illness. And personally, I've pitched stories to newsrooms over and over again, and time after time, I get the same answer. We have more pressing issues. We have more pressing issues. And I think they underestimate the toll mental illness has on society, right? The toll, the years of life that it takes away, the economic impact it has. And I think the understanding is not there that all the issues of healthcare, of government, of violence that they highlight, all of them have a mental illness component to it. And for example, this one story I covered about this attack that happened on a school, I talked to this one student who had survived that attack, right? He had lost colleagues in that attack. And when I spoke to him about his experience, he said to me, "You're the first person who's asked me, how am I coping?" Because that's a question that no one asks. Every other journalist who ever talked to him was like, "Oh, what did you see? Oh, where were you? Oh, were you standing here? Were you standing there?" So even in that, like even the basic courtesy of understanding that, hey, this person has gone through something traumatic is something that's missing in Pakistani journalism.
Sure. So to continue with you, Saad, how have language barriers affected your reporting and conversations around mental health and mental illness on top of all of that?
Right. So, one of the things I realized, first thing was that there's a big class difference. And in Pakistan, the dynamic is that class and language are things that are very deeply tied, right? So if you're someone if you're someone that is, let's say, in the upper middle class or elite class, you're more likely to speak English. You're more likely to be familiar with mental health terminology in English, right? But most Pakistanis are not fluent in English, right? And so what I found was that the tools I had at my disposal, they were Western, right? The language I was using was English. The symptoms I was describing were in English. And a lot of what I was saying and what they were saying was sort of lost in translation. And so I talked to doctors, I talked to psychiatrists, and what I found out was there is no native medical vocabulary, right? So what we have in Urdu is and Urdu is the language of Pakistan, in case people don't know. We have we don't have translations. We just have a direct word for word. So in Urdu, depression is also called depression. So as someone who speaks English, I can hear the word depression and sort of understand, or anxiety, I can understand sort of what it may mean. But for someone who doesn't speak the language at all, it's it's gibberish. It means nothing at all. And the words we do have in our language are very heavily stigmatized. So, the word you'd hear the most for someone who's mentally ill is pagal, which means crazy. It just means crazy, right? Or you'd have words like divana or majnu, which are romanticized sort of words for mental illness, like, oh, I love that person so much, I went mad over them. So we don't have the vocabulary, and it saddens me every day that we are at that point, and it's been, years of neglect. And I think another thing I did notice was how we sort of the language we use to approach mental illness, right? So the way I have learned and I've been trained is like I would also sometimes take this biological approach to mental illness. I would say, hey, this is something that is like diabetes, right? If you, with the right help and the right lifestyle and medication, you're going to be fine, right? There's something that we can fix. But I often found that turned people off even more, that language of biological illness, because that means something is broken inside your mind. And so things like that.
Thanks. Andres, have you experienced language barriers with your work as well?
I wouldn't say that language barriers as much as a sort of like context barriers. I mean, sometimes language barriers do occur whenever you are reporting and writing about communities that belong to one of the 104 ethnic minorities that Colombia has, which are in general very small, relatively small indigenous populations living in remote areas. But due to the remoteness of where they live, they really, really suffered the brunt of the conflict, and therefore have a very considerable mental and emotional health toll in their communities. But I would say that more than that, it's the fact that we have Colombia shares some of the patterns that we were just hearing about in Pakistan, with these enormous class divides. And even, equally impressive or equally challenging, this enormous rural-urban gap. And therefore, what happens a lot of the time is that the majority of media outlets fail to cover what is happening in rural areas. And therefore, in many of these occasions, communities have never seen a journalist. Or, it's not that they don't know what a journalist is, but they haven't had a one-to-one interaction with them. So it has, and when they do see, or the journalism they're more familiar with is more or less the, very quick TV, the newscast style of journalism, which is really superficial in many of these issues that I'd like to tackle in depth and try to understand in their complexity. So I think the biggest barrier for me sometimes has been to be able to describe what I'm doing, why I care about the issues that they have been facing, why I care about the solutions that they have devised. In many occasions, they don't really, see the problem they've been facing as a mental and emotional health one. But that doesn't really matter to me, because what I've been trying to do is document these strategies that they have devised to rebuild their lives. And therefore, whatever the mental health part of it is just is part of a larger story. And sometimes what's been difficult but also very rewarding is trying to explain to them why I care about that part of their story. I think once you do, you're able to convey that to them, they get it, they like it, they're open to it. But initially they have this sort of like, who are you and why are you asking me these not extremely personal, but sort of questions about, what I went through, and moreover, what I've been doing to get over what I went through.
Yeah. I want to say quickly to everyone who is watching, again, thank you for being here. And if you have any questions at all, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this discussion. So please feel free to go into that chat box and type any question that you might have or any comment. Andres, let's continue with you. What has been your experience as a journalist going through the fellowship training with the Carter Center, and what did you learn, or how did you change your reporting after the fellowship?
It was a very illuminating moment for my professional development, because I had been covering issues related to our peace deal, and especially to victims of our armed conflict, for quite a number of years before the fellowship, about 5 or 6 years, and we had our peace deal was ongoing. Our peace negotiation was ongoing while I was a fellow, and it was very illuminating for me for one reason. I had centered on trying to understand how victims were rebuilding their lives. I think fortunately Colombia had very recently gone over, sort of like turned the page of seeing the most direct effects of conflict and trying to understand some of the more indirect and aftermath consequences, while at the same time people were rebuilding. So there was there was a big opportunity for a sort of constructive journalism, trying to understand what communities had been doing, what they've been inventing to cope, to rebuild their lives, to progress, to seek new opportunities for their children and their community members. And the fellowship gave me this unique opportunity, or this unique chance to be able to profit from being in this very transformational moment for Colombian history, the beginning of this transition from civil strife to what we hope is peace, lasting peace, somewhere along the road. And I was able to not just learn about mental and emotional health issues, but basically to incorporate this into my reporting, to even if it was stories that I was doing, not during the fellowship or not directly connected to the fellowship. What I ended up realizing was that I was always asking these questions that led to an understanding of what mental and emotional health problems communities or people had, and even further along, what had they been doing, what strategies they had come up with to be able to overcome these problems, or to live with them in better terms, and in general terms to rebuild their lives. So it gave me like this, opened the door to a whole new universe of reporting, that even though I had been conversing all the time, covering on the ground, visiting these sort of communities, there were certain questions that I had never been asking, and certain things that I had never been thinking thoroughly, and that made my reporting, I feel, much more complex, much more wide-ranging. And I think I can understand these processes that these people have been going through while they rebuild their life projects in a much more comprehensive way. And I think that's, that didn't end with my fellowship. I keep doing this. I keep them asking about these things all the time. I keep getting answers. I keep seeing things about the way people have basically, in very creative and innovative ways, come up with their own strategies to cope, that I had never spotted before, and that I would not have been able to spot were it not for these very lengthy conversations with all the mental health professionals in the Carter Center Circle, or had I not read books that I discovered, like Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which was such an eye-opener and gave me so many new tools as a journalist. So that's basically what my experience through the fellowship has been.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Saad, how was your experience in the fellowship program, and how has that changed the way that you see and use media?
Right. So, one of the things that I cherished the most from that entire experience, I think it had us like there's been a seismic shift in my perspective when it comes to my reporting, right? So there was a time when I would, go into a news story, I would want to get the hard facts, like this happened, this happened, this happened, and never give a second thought to like the feelings of it, the emotions of it, the the lived experience of it, right? But it really opened my mind to that. And I think one of the most wonderful parts of the entire fellowship, and I wish there were the resources to double the number of reporters who could be there. But I because one of the best things was just about like the kind of people it brought together, right? So you had professors from Harvard who had spent their entire lifetimes writing and researching about this. You had journalists from all across radio, film, broadcast, like across the entire spectrum of journalism. And everyone who came there, I think it was maybe part of the selection process or whatever it was, but the people that ended up in that room, they had such different stories, and they were all approaching mental health. Someone would come in from the religion point of view with mental health, someone would come in with migrant workers, refugees, and just seeing like the fact that there's like 25 people here and everyone has their own angle, their own perspective, their own story. When I came back to Qatar, it opened my like view to, hey, if to like I could see the mental health angle everywhere now, right? And I still fondly remember those conversations and listening, and I think one of the things I also like, from that conference, I have like at least 30 to 40 pages just full of notes. Like I just kept writing everything down because everything was so interesting. And one of the best things was listening to people ask questions, asking questions yourself, because this was a topic that I didn't feel comfortable covering. And there was a lot of things I was worried about, like how, like, is it right to make someone relive their trauma just for your story, right? How do you shield yourself from, hearing these things day in and day out? And I think just having these conversations with not only other journalists, right, but other people who are experts in psychology, who are experts in, who have spent a lifetime doing journalism, like they have white hair and they're like 40, 50 years of like, reporting. I think as a student, it's something that I cherish, and I see it, I see the way in which it affects the stories I pitch, the stories I think about, and even when I'm cutting stories, when I'm editing out, I always leave that graph or two that captures someone's lived experience.
That's really great. Thank you, Saad, for sharing all of that. We certainly missed having all of that opportunity to interact in person this year, but of course, everyone is doing what we're doing now, meeting virtually. So speaking of that, Andres, do you think that the increase in discussion around mental health from the pandemic will just decrease stigma and help encourage better reporting and language for mental health disorders?
Well, I think it has. I'm not sure how widespread it is, but I do think that the pandemic opened, an avenue that was perhaps much less evident before, and it's just how widespread the very diverse array of mental and emotional health issues are. And I think maybe by making that more clearer, for a wider group of people in society, we've been much more aware of its effects. And I was speaking last week with a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist and a professor at one of our most important universities here, and she specializes in children and trauma. And she was saying, because we have a small project going on as part of a cross-border effort into looking at how different governments in Latin America have been dealing with the pandemic. And there's one small little project that we're doing in 3 countries, exploring emotional health issues in youngsters, in people from the age of 18 to 28. And we were doing that using, via crowdsourcing. But the more interesting part of that was that we brought a bunch of mental health professionals on board that project, and they're basically co-running it with journalists. But I was discussing with other things with her, and she was saying that she was seeing a sort of conversation between mental health professionals and journalists that she had never seen before. She'd lived for quite a couple of years in Australia before returning. She did her PhD there, and she returned to Colombia. And this doesn't mean that she had been in contact with journalists for a very long time, but she was hearing this from her colleagues as well. And she was saying, I think something is happening here. And she'd always text me and say, like, this is terrible how they're covering suicide, or it's terrible how they're, covering eating disorders, etc., etc. Now she was saying, like, that hasn't changed. You still have that coverage, but you have these amazing projects and these amazing conversations happening between mental health professionals and reporters from even some of the largest media outlets that were not there before. So I do see a certain change. I'm not sure how widespread it is. I think it could be the beginning of something, in a sense, that we can see a bit more, awareness, especially awareness of language, awareness of subject matters that we're not covering, overall, awareness of impacts that are sort of underreported and maybe less visible than the more obvious ones, including, of course, everything from economic recession to an increase in poverty. But that we're seeing these problems. We're seeing this in a clearer way, perhaps, than we had before. The biggest question is: are we going to invest in reporting in this on the long run? Are we going to continue looking at this as part of what we do as media outlets? And obviously, I don't know the question, the answer, sorry, to that question, but I do think it's something there has happened.
Sure, I think so too, and I hope so. Saad, how do you see the conversations changing around mental health through the pandemic?
I think it's really opened people to, because I think for the first time people had to experience some of the symptoms or some of the way mental illness can make you feel, right? And I remember I was at The Guardian when the pandemic started, and I think just having to be inside in isolation by yourself, alone with your thoughts, it really made people sensitive to mental illness, to the point that The Guardian did an entire series on mental illness and how do you cope with mental illness during the pandemic. And it really encouraged that particular newsroom itself to really, because The Guardian's US office was not really covering mental health as a project, but I think just having experienced the pandemic really opened them up to the idea, to the point that they were debunking things about mental health. They were doing an entire series on it. And I think there is it's definitely started a conversation about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Saad, also, how do you hope to see mental health related language change for the better in your native language, especially when you're talking about Pakistan as well as in Qatar? And do you think it's possible?
Right. I think it's very, very much possible, right? I think, as someone who loves reading Urdu literature and language, I know it to be a very rich and powerful language, right? Like, how can a language that's a hybrid of Arabic and Sanskrit and Persian and Turkish, like these four mega languages, not have the necessary flexibility to develop the words we need? So I have no doubt that our language has the richness to explain these ideas and these problems. I just think it's a matter of investment and resources, right? And there are certain, NGOs who have started doing this. There are people in Pakistan who are aware of the problem. So there is an organization called Umang in Pakistan who run a they run a mental health helpline, a hotline you can call, right? And so they were the people who I had a conversation with, because they are talking to people over the phone. And these people call them mostly from rural areas, right? So they have developed sort of a handbook in Urdu, right? So even though they don't have the right like the medical vocabulary, they are already working on vocabulary to describe symptoms, right? Which I thought was a really, really good sign. Another thing that it's outside journalism, but I think the art scene in Pakistan has really, really embraced mental health. So I see a lot of people making art that addresses it. I see a lot of exhibitions around these themes associated with mental illness. So I think it's a long road ahead. I think there needs to be journalists with the same training in newsrooms across Pakistan. But I see a very positive trend. Like, I don't see, and you can judge it by how the youth thinks about it, and the amount of Instagram pages around mental health in Pakistan. Like, I see 15 new ones every day. Like, I get follow requests from, and it's not journalism, of course, but it's a good sign to me that if young people care about it, then it means 30 years from now, 20 years from now, we'll be in a much, much better place.
Yes, I agree. Andres, same question.
Sorry,
I'll repeat.
My
It's
turn?
yes. How do you hope to see mental health related change in the language for the better in your native language, as well as do you think it's possible?
I do think that there's, I mean, I think that there's two things that I think are important. One is obviously being able to communicate better practices in terms, including language, of course, and also furthering our understanding of the entire array of mental and emotional health issues and illnesses, because obviously we do have a very diverse set of mental health issues, and they affect obviously people from different communities in very different ways. When I think about Colombia, for example, I think like we do need specifically, for example, a broader understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder, because even if people have not been diagnosed PTSD, which the immense majority have not been, collectively it is a country that has been very affected by it, and I have no idea what the percentage would be of people who've suffered it because it hasn't been measured, but it's clearly a very large one. And so I do think there's, if we were able to further the understanding of journalists in both of these areas, first language and then other, like understanding the illnesses and the mental health issues themselves, I think we could probably also be able to do another thing that is very important, and it's how to learn how to I'm going to say behave, but I'm not sure if it's the right word, but learn how to, as a journalist, approach people who have and communities who have been through this. Sometimes you don't even need to use the medical language, and I was trying to remember, Assad was speaking about his experience, if I had ever had this situation in which I had tried, I had been sort of like struggling to express myself in these terms, and I think I haven't, because I've actually sort of shied away from the more medical aspects of these mental and emotional health issues to begin with, because most of these communities that I've reported on have never had any contact with medical professionals regarding mental and health and emotional health issues. But for the latter part, because I think anyways, a very important part of the story is not just, whether they have experienced symptoms or whether anybody has been able to identify the existence of these of these mental health issues, but rather what has happened to their lives and how have they been able to go around them, or live with them, work with them, rebuild their lives, even while of course we know that many a brunt of these issues are still there, and there hasn't been any solution, but at the same time people are moving forward and rebuilding their lives and learning to cope and learning to live with these issues. So I do think a very important part of that is, I'm not sure if I'm being able to convey this, but is how can we as reporters learn how to approach people correctly with this? Forget about the language for a moment, the language in terms of the medical one, but what is the correct way to approach them in terms of being sensitive to what they've been through? How do you say this? Sensitive about what they've been living, being perceptive about the ways they've been coping, and then being able to convey that in our reporting. And I learned a lot about that from reading Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which basically explains how trauma works. But also, and it's what I valued most, it gives you a lot of ideas about how to approach people that have experienced trauma. And I think it's something that it just becomes ingrained in your reporting. You learn how to do that just as you fact check, you do pre-reporting, you do the logistics, you understand who's a credible source. Like, it just becomes part of your reporting DNA. And how can we scale that up? I don't have any answers to that, but that's the one thing that I think I would like to be able to share more widely amongst the community of journalism professionals.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that. So we have our first question from the chat. What are some ways that experts and/or the mental health reporters can communicate the best practices, including language for suicide and referring to people with lived experience, to broader media outlets and reporters? Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I've always worked in smaller media outlets, so I'm not sure I can address that part of the broader media outlets part. But I do think that having one journalist in a newsroom that has been covering these issues helps a lot, because it gives, the media outlet gains a lot of awareness about why these stories matter. And I actually haven't been in a newsroom since I was a fellow, because I've done all of this coverage as an independent reporter. But I've published most of my work in the several in one of the newsrooms where I worked before. So I have constant communication with them, and I see that they're much more sensitive about these issues than they were before. Getting your foot inside the door may be tough sometimes. In my case, I have one slight advantage, and it's the fact that what makes a lot of the stories that I have written about timely is the fact that they're connected to the country's transition. So by telling these stories of people who've been rebuilding their lives in this sort of like post-conflict or transition scenario, the news peg is there, which is sometimes, as Saad was describing a while ago, the toughest part, like getting an editor to say, yes, I do want that story, I want to publish it. But what I've seen is that once you get that initial foot in the door, many of these editors and media outlets are much more open, much more aware of the importance of mental and emotional health, and will maybe give you a better shot at pitching a second time, pitching another time. Getting to a bigger media outlet, it's a tougher nut to crack, and maybe Sad has better advice on that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, one of the ways to do this in a more long-term way would be to sort of integrate this into journalism education. So, like our education today, for example, it teaches us how to do statistics for news. It teaches us how to do data visualization. So there's a lot of, technical aspects that we learn in our training as journalists. So in our, if you're in grad school for journalism, or if you're, in an undergrad program. So I think that's something we can, talk to, the academics who teach this, and sort of make sure that the new cadre of journalists who are going to be, working in newsrooms 5 years from now, 10 years from now, are better equipped to deal with mental health and the language they should be using. Because, for example, if they can teach us AP style, and there's a handbook for AP style that I have to memorize by heart by the time I'm out of my 4 years program, I think it doesn't hurt to also have a style book for treating. And I think the AP actually very much recently did have some changes in language when it comes to mental health. So I think one of the more fundamental ways to change this is to directly address journalism education in any shape or form.
Absolutely. And we, as a program, that's a big part of why we are partnered with Northwestern University in Qatar in Education City through WISH, because it's, just like Saad, you've mentioned with education, how important it is. And we're also creating a lot of materials for newsrooms, as well as for journalists inside newsrooms they can share amongst each other, as well as at different places for education like universities. For our final question, let's just wanted to ask you both, is there anything that we haven't covered here today that you think is important and you want to share with anyone, or any personal thoughts for our audience as we wrap up?
I would say one thing, and it's that we sometimes think that writing about mental and emotional health means writing about the mental and emotional health issues themselves. But there's a lot of stories that are not obviously mental and emotional health related that they are all about it. And when I was writing about an indigenous family in the very high altitude mountains of Colombia, who resorted to weightlifting as a competitive sport in order to gain opportunities that they never had, and in that way heal a lot of the trauma their community had suffered. Or when I was reporting on landmine victims who had discovered a Japanese arts and crafts technique called kintsugi, which is all about basically mending broken porcelain. And this was, metaphorically a way that of them healing as well. So a lot of the times you see mental and emotional health stories that are not it's not evident that they're about mental and emotional health. They have just this very, very important human aspect to them that makes them timely to tell. And they have that angle there. So you observe carefully, you're going to see it there. And sometimes, the way to sell them to editors and to pitch them is not maybe insisting on the mental health part of it, but just the human aspect of them. And there's that entire story there to them anyways.
Perfect. Saad, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, previously we were talking about sort of how, like the language is not as important as, maybe there are other ways to go about addressing it that are not just, medical terms. And, on the same note, I was also thinking that we should also be cognizant of the different lenses that people are looking at their own mental health, right? So I might come in with this, idea of mental illness as, through Freud and psychoanalysis and all of this, but there are a lot of people who might be thinking of their mental health in relationship to their religion. There might be a lot of people who are thinking of their mental health in relationship with their community. And I've also found, one thing worth noting is that when I was reporting in the US versus when I was reporting in Pakistan, that the way people describe their symptoms, because you ask like how, like, what did you feel? So one difference I found was that in the US, people were more likely to talk to me about their emotional symptoms that they were feeling. Whereas in Pakistan, I was more likely to hear about physical symptoms, right? So if someone had PTSD, they would say, I get shivers and I get this and I get that. So I thought it was very interesting that even what we're choosing to share or what we're even recognizing is very much different. And one of the people that I talked to, right? So this person had experienced PTSD because he had grown up in a very violent area of Pakistan, Peshawar, during the height of, the terrorist attacks there. And a lot of his language was never about his emotions. It was about the physical things he felt, as like, the shakiness, not being able to make decisions. And that's something that I had to learn and get in tune with, that I might be used to hearing certain kinds of symptoms in recognizing if someone is a source or not, but it can be very much different.
Sure. Thank you both so much. That's all the time we have. At any point throughout the end of the summit, feel free to visit the Carter Center booth in the Innovation Hub. We have a lot of staff members there to talk about all of our programs that have presented this week so far. We have, any questions that you have, you can ask them. And if you have any additional questions after the summit, you can email us at the program at carterfellows@cartercenter.org. And that is it. Thank you, Andres and Saad, for joining me today. And thank you all for watching today with us. Thank you. Have a great week.